My name is Megan Ross. I'm 30 years old. When I returned from a business trip to London, I found myself standing on my own front porch with a suitcase in one hand and keys that no longer worked in the other. The locks had been changed. Confused, I called my parents, only to hear the words that still ring in my ears. Sorry, but we sold your house. The money went to Daniel's Bali vacation and a new family SUV. I was left with nothing. At least, that's what my parents thought. I just smiled because they had no idea what they'd actually done. Before I tell you how I turned the tables, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe button for more family secrets that will leave you speechless. When I was 9, my younger brother, Daniel, the prince of our small split-level house, threw a tantrum because my birthday cake had strawberries and his favorite was chocolate. Mom cut around the fruit for him, handed him the first slice, then scolded me for making a fuss when I asked if I could blow out the candles before they melted. On his 10th, they rented a bounce house and a magician. On my 12th, we split a sheet cake bought on clearance because the frosting had a typo. Chores split the same way. I learned the rhythm of laundry. Measure, pour, fold, the clink of plates stacked just right, the quiet scrape of a sponge on pans after spaghetti nights. Daniel needed to focus on school, which meant video games and soccer in the yard, while I ironed his jersey so it looked crisp in pictures. When he forgot his homework, Mom drove it to school. When I forgot mine after a double shift at the diner in high school, the lecture lasted a week. At 16, Daniel got a slightly used Civic with a bow on the hood and 3 rules he ignored by dinner. I got a laminated bus pass tucked into a birthday card with a note about building character. He crashed the Civic into a mailbox 2 months later. Dad called it a lesson and bought sturdier tires. I paid a parking ticket once, $10, and listened to a speech about irresponsibility as if I'd set the neighborhood on fire. School was my escape, but even there I learned to hold applause in my own hands. I brought home straight A's a certificate from the regional essay contest. It ended up under a stack of mail. Daniel made junior varsity after missing most of tryouts, and we celebrated with takeout and balloons. Parent-teacher conferences for him meant mom in lipstick and a notepad. For me, it was "We're slammed, honey, tell your teachers we're proud," and I did, always, the way good daughters do. By 15, I was clocking hours wherever someone would hire me. Saturday mornings at the grocery store bakery, afternoons babysitting the neighbor's twins, evenings bussing tables at the diner with the sticky floors. Most of my paychecks vanished into house expenses when the water heater broke or Daniel needed a camp deposit. The rest I tucked into an envelope marked college, counting every bill at my desk like prayers. When Daniel wanted a last-minute spot at a summer soccer camp, the envelope got lighter because we're family, Meg. Prom season was a quiet humiliation I hid with lipstick. I stitched a thrift store dress with a YouTube tutorial and hope. Daniel's tux was rented without discussion. He and his friends took a limo my parents split with 3 other families. I did my makeup in the bathroom beneath the humming light and took the bus to a restaurant where my date, a decent boy from debate, offered to pay, and I insisted we split. I still kept the receipt, proof I could carry my half. College became my holy place because no one could deny I'd gotten there on my own. I chose a state university by the ocean so I could breathe. My parents said they couldn't help with tuition. Money's tight with Daniel's SAT tutor and his gap year abroad, we promised him. I nodded and worked. 5 a.m. cappuccinos at the campus cafe, afternoons shelving books at the library, nights waiting tables where the sea air blew in every time the door opened. I learned to memorize menus and deadlines, to study on 10-minute breaks, to sleep like a soldier, light and ready. Meanwhile, Daniel collected second and third chances like jerseys. He tried a private college and left by Thanksgiving. He announced a startup no one could explain and burned through seed money my parents called a little boost. He got a job at an uncle's firm and forgot to show up Monday after a lake weekend. The narrative never changed. He was finding himself. When I missed one family barbecue because my manager begged me to cover a shift, Mom said the family felt neglected. The smaller cuts hurt more than the big ones because they were daily. At Christmas, I unwrapped socks and a planner for your lists. Daniel got new noise-canceling headphones, a smartwatch, and the good steak for dinner because he needs protein for training. When he borrowed my laptop for a week, it returned with a crack in the case and an apology that belonged on a sticky note. I bought a used replacement from a girl on campus and tutored freshmen to pay for it. I learned the economy of silence. Can you transfer $200? Daniel's tires are bald. Do you have time to help him rewrite his resume? Could you pick him up from the airport? Our backs are killing us. If I hesitated, I got the same tilt of Mom's head, the sigh that said I was selfish. So I said yes and yes again, and then learned how to say no without moving my lips. I'm swamped. My card was compromised. My shift ends past midnight. I picked truth that still felt like betrayal. But not everything was bleak. My grandmother Helen lived a short drive from campus, a woman who baked lemon bars that cut sweetness with a sting. She never badmouthed my parents, but she noticed. She'd press $20 into my palm for gas, and I'd find a grocery store gift card hidden under the tin foil. She framed my dean's list letter on her hallway wall and moved Daniel's glossy soccer photo to make room. In her kitchen, favoritism loosened its grip, and I remembered I had worth that wasn't contingent on anyone's mood. When Daniel failed out the second time, there was a family meeting where I was told it was our crisis. I brought a casserole and kept my mouth shut while Dad mapped out a plan that sounded suspiciously like forgiveness with a stipend. I offered to edit Daniel's application essays if he wanted to try community college. He nodded, grateful for the hour, then forgot to send drafts. A month later, he posted photos from Cabo, his tan captioned, "New Beginnings." I graduated on a windy Saturday with a cheap gown and a diploma that felt heavier than it looked. No banner, no brunch reservation, just me, a borrowed pair of heels, and Grandma's lemon bars in the back seat for later. My parents clapped when my name was called, then left early because Daniel had a thing. I took pictures by the ocean with a coworker who ended up becoming a friend. That night, I counted the cash tips I'd stashed in a jar labeled First Home and promised myself the next set of beautiful photos would be mine. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, I walked into a realtor's office with my savings account printout and said the words that made me shake. I'm ready to buy. The house wasn't much to anyone else. A weathered cottage by the ocean with peeling paint, cracked tiles, and windows that rattled in the wind. But the first time I saw it, I knew it was mine. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was possible. It was only a 40-minute drive from Grandma Helen's, and I could smell the salt air the moment I stepped out of my car. The realtor frowned when I smiled at the sagging porch and the weeds growing between the stones. It's a fixer-upper, she warned, like I didn't already see the rot in the wood or the leaks in the ceiling. But in my head, I wasn't seeing ruin. I signed the papers, and 2 weeks later I stood on that porch with the keys biting into my palm. My parents didn't come to see it. They called it a waste of money and reminded me Daniel would need help if he ever settled down. But Helen came. She brought flowers from her garden and placed them in a chipped vase on the kitchen counter. "It's yours," she said softly, running her hand across the window frame. "And no one can ever say you didn't earn it." That house became my heartbeat. I learned to repair drywall with YouTube videos, to sand floors until my hands blistered, to paint walls at midnight when the summer heat made it impossible during the day. Every improvement was a conversation between me and the life I was building. When I tore out the rotting cabinets, I laughed, imagining what my parents would say if they saw me knee-deep in wood dust. It wasn't glamorous. Sometimes the pipes leaked just after I fixed them. Sometimes the storms knocked shingles loose faster than I could replace them. But every setback became a lesson. Every bruise on my shin, every splinter in my palm, every sore muscle was proof that I was shaping a space with my own hands. And slowly, my house transformed. I repainted the porch white with shutters the color of sea glass. I planted herbs in cracked clay pots on the kitchen windowsill. I bought secondhand furniture and refinished it, sanding down years of use until it shone. When the sun set over the ocean, spilling gold across my living room, I would sit on the floor with a cheap glass of wine and just breathe. Helen visited often, bringing her quiet wisdom with her. We drink tea on the porch while listening to the waves crash. She told me stories about her own struggles, the years when she and my grandfather had nearly lost everything, the jobs she worked to keep food on the table. She looked at me as if I was her reflection, a continuation of her resilience. One evening, as the sun slipped into the horizon, she said, "Megan, this house is more than just walls and a roof. You've built yourself, piece by piece, and now you've built a place that will carry that spirit." Her words stayed with me. Every time I doubted myself, I looked around at the walls I painted, the floors I repaired, the small victories etched into every corner. To everyone else, it was an old cottage with new paint. To me, it was independence made solid, freedom made visible. And I swore I'd protect it no matter what it took. 2 weeks before London, Dad called me out of the blue, which meant something was brewing. He never called just to chat. He cleared his throat and went straight to it. "Meg, leave us a set of keys. Safety reasons. You know those winter storms, pipes burst, alarms glitch. Insurance likes when family can check on a place." I told him I already had a spare hidden in a terracotta pot on the back steps. He tooted like I was a stubborn child. "Not good enough. What if a stranger finds it? Give me a proper set, and I'll keep them in my safe." I didn't like the feeling that rose in me, that old tightness of being handled. "Grandma Helen's 10 minutes away," I reminded him. "If something happens, she knows the plumber better than anyone." That only sharpened his tone. "She's not as steady on ladders as she used to be." "Don't make this difficult." Mom chimed in later, soft as butter. "Your father just wants peace of mind. Daniel will swing by to water the rosemary, that's all." She made it sound like a favor to me. I handed over the keys 3 days before my flight, against the tug in my stomach. Dad slipped them onto his crowded ring, a satisfied click that made my palms go cold. Daniel took a selfie on my porch with the ocean in the background and joked about house-sitting like a pro. I laughed because it was easier than naming the dread. Work, mercifully, gave me something clean to hold. I'd been invited to speak at a design conference in London, my first big talk, slides I had fussed over for months. I left the cottage spotless, sheets washed and sun-dried, pantry neat, a list on the fridge with service numbers, and a plea in my own handwriting: "Please don't rearrange anything." I watered the jade plant and locked the windows with that little wiggle the old latches need. Then I touched the door frame like it could bless me. The flight was a blur of recycled air and headphone static. Heathrow was rain and bright lights, the tube humming beneath my feet while my carry-on bumped my shin. My hotel room was small, the kind where the closet is pretend and the kettle is your best friend. I called Helen to say I'd landed, and we laughed about the English breakfast I would pretend to enjoy. "Dear best, love," she said. "And come home proud." Conference days swept me along. I practiced in a hallway with bad carpet, braided my hair with shaking hands, and finally stood under lights that were hotter than they looked. I told a room of strangers about color theory and shoreline neighborhoods, and how design should respect quiet lives. People clapped. A woman from Manchester handed me her card. I slept like a stone. What I didn't know, back home, the keys went into a different kind of lock. On day 2, Daniel texted a photo of my living room with the caption, "Looks the same as always. Chill." A throw pillow had been moved, a small thing, but my eyes caught it. I wrote back, "Please be careful with the windows. The latch on the east side sticks." He replied with a thumbs up and a surfer emoji. Later, a number I didn't recognize called 3 times. No voicemail. I silenced it for rehearsal and forgot. Dad, it turns out, didn't forget anything. The keys opened the door, but the real entry was a stack of papers. A listing agreement I had never seen. A consent form with my name spelled correctly in the neat, sharp strokes only my mother had. They wrote my middle initial, too, so it would look official. I imagine the pen in her hand, the way she presses down too hard and leaves a groove. The realtor, a woman from a nearby firm I nodded to at farmers' markets, walked through my rooms with Dad and Daniel as if they were the owners. Daniel flung the windows wide for the view. Dad stood with his arms folded like a foreman. They discussed price over coffee at my table. My table. I can't stop thinking about their cups sitting on the wood I sanded at midnight. The listing went live with phrases that felt stolen from my blood. Sunlit coastal gem, owner renovated, minutes from family. Open house Saturday, private showings before then. The photos were bright, my throw blanket folded wrong. There were steps I didn't understand then. A seller's disclosure, patched together from old paperwork Mom found in a drawer. A limited power of attorney. A notary friend signed after Dad assured her I had authorized everything but was out of the country. My signature, my slanted M, the tail of the G, appeared on a line without my hand attached to it. I know my own mistakes. I make a tiny notch on the R in Ross like a wave. They missed that. They made me too perfect. While I walked the Thames after my talk, mist sticking to my cheeks, a couple from Seattle walked my kitchen. He opened the pantry. She pressed a palm to the sun-warm glass of the slider and said, "I can see us here." They offered that evening, aggressive, above list, eager to close before the end of the month. The number that had called me twice was the title office. Their email, caught in a promotions tab I barely checked, asked me to confirm wiring instructions. It began with "Hi Megan" and ended with confetti emoji like a birthday card. I didn't see it. I was answering questions from attendees, smiling at compliments, making a joke about jet lag while my life was peeled away like tape from a wall. By Sunday, mutual acceptance was in place. A courier stopped by Dad's office with a stack of documents. Mom signed my name on a deed in front of someone who stamped it and slid it back like a sandwich order. The notary asked a question just to be sure, and Mom answered without missing a breath, "Yes, Megan is my daughter." Which was true, and beside the point, and exactly how they did it. They arranged facts around the lie until the lie looked like a couch out of place. I FaceTimed Helen from my bed that night, showing her the little biscuits that came with the tea kit and the view of slate rooftops. "Proud of you," she said again, and I swallowed the sudden sting. I almost told her about the keys, about the way Dad's voice had felt like a hand on the back of my neck, steadying or pushing, I couldn't tell. I didn't. I was tired, and I wanted to be the version of myself who had just given a talk in another country and could bask in that for 5 minutes. They scheduled closing for the Thursday I'd be in the air coming home. Money moved. Numbers that didn't belong to me slid from one place to another. A buyer's agent sent my congratulations to the email address Mom had added to the paperwork, an address off by one letter from mine. When my plane lifted off from Heathrow, I pressed my forehead to the window and watched clouds swallow London. I thought about salt on my porch steps, about the way the door sighed when it closed. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a deed recorded. A lockbox clicked shut. A sold banner appeared under a photo of my living room that made the room look bigger than it is. I slept for an hour with my mouth open like a child. In the thin dream that came, I was standing on my own porch with 2 keys in my hand. One turned. One didn't. Jet lag wrapped around me like wet wool, heavy and damp, when I pulled into my parents' driveway. The porch light was already on even though the sun hadn't gone down yet, a little theater spotlight for the performance they'd rehearsed without me. Mom opened the door before I knocked, her smile paper-thin over nerves. Dad stood behind her with his arms crossed. Daniel slouched at the kitchen island, absently spinning my old high school keychain like a toy he'd found in a parking lot. "Travel okay?" Mom asked, voice too bright. She glanced at my suitcase as if it might bite her. "I couldn't get into my house," I said, and watched their eyes settle into their places, Mom's darting, Dad's flat, Daniel's defensive. No one looked surprised. That told me everything. Dad moved to the head of the table, the chair he always claimed during holidays and arguments. He gestured for me to sit. The fruit bowl in the center was full of plastic grapes that had been dusty since I was 12. "I called the locksmith twice," I continued. "He said the locks were changed yesterday." Daniel coughed into his fist. Mom folded her hands. Dad cleared his throat, that old gavel sound he used when he was about to call the room to order. He didn't circle it. He didn't soften it. He delivered the line like a verdict. "Your house paid your brother's vacation and our new family car." Silence slid over the kitchen like ice. Somewhere, the refrigerator motor hummed on cue. Daniel's gaze skittered to the window. Mom said my name once, as if it were an apology all by itself. Dad watched my face, waiting for the crack, the tear, the pleading. He mistook the pause for compliance. Like he always had. But I surprised us all by smiling. It was a clean, quiet thing, like clicking a light switch in a room I had already mapped in the dark. My cheeks felt steady. "You have no idea what you sold," I said. The words floated in the lemon air. Dad's jaw twitched. Mom blinked too fast. Daniel's foot stopped tapping. For the first time since I was a child, they didn't know what came next. Dad leaned forward, elbows on the table, pretending to be amused. "Meg," he said, drawing out the syllable. "Listen me. We're talking about a piece of property, not religion." His hands made a small dismissive circle, as if he could stir the steam back into the pot. I tilted my head. "A piece of property," I repeated, as if testing the weight of the phrase. "Is that what you thought it was?" Daniel scoffed. "We got a great offer. Market's nuts. You should be thanking us for the timing." His voice shook on the last word. He knew timing was my god, how many shifts I'd worked, how many paychecks I'd split to make that down payment happen. He couldn't quite look at me when he said it. Mom reached for the fruit bowl, rearranged plastic grapes like prayer beads. "It was a family decision," she tried. "Your job has you traveling." "We thought." "You thought," I said, "a lot of things." I kept my tone even, the way Grandma Helen had taught me to keep my hands steady while icing a cake. Dad bristled at that, color rising in his neck. "We acted like responsible adults. Daniel needed a reset, and your mother, and I need reliable transportation. The SUV has third-row seating. For holidays." He said it like a benevolent decree. "You can buy another house. A condo even. Something less isolated." But cottage wasn't isolated, it was mine. And beneath those clapboard walls lived a document with more backbone than any of them. Because here was the part one didn't say out loud: the house did not legally belong to me the way they imagined it did. It belonged to my grandmother Helen's trust, her stubborn, elegant idea of protection sitting quietly behind the deed like bedrock under sand. We'd gone to the bank together the year I bought it, her hand warm on my arm as the trust officer slid papers across a polished desk. Helen had insisted on it: title in the trust, me as beneficiary and co-trustee, language that wrapped the property like a shield. She'd called it prudence. I hadn't argued. I remembered the binder she kept in the hall closet behind the vacuum, the green one with metal corners and tabs, each section tidy with signatures and dates. I remembered the way she'd tapped the page that stated transfer restrictions, her ring clicking against the paper. "People make poor choices under pressure," she'd said, looking at me over her glasses. "This is how we make sure yours can't be stolen while you're catching your breath." My breath now felt slow and absolute. I only needed to let the fear find the right door in their minds and begin to knock. Daniel tried a laugh that arrived late and left early. "You're being weird, Meg. It's done." Money moved. Don't make it uglier than it has to be. I looked at him, really looked, at the tan line from Bali peeking over his collar, the new watch he wasn't used to wearing yet, the old habit of glancing at Dad before finishing a sentence. "You spent it already," I said, quiet as a tide. "It was our decision," Dad repeated, a metronome of authority. He pushed a folded set of papers across the table as proof, the way you move salt and pepper toward a guest. "Sign here acknowledging receipt of proceeds when the final wire clears. We've handled the rest." I didn't touch the papers. The top page flashed my name in a font I would never choose. The signature line waited, hungry. "Dad," I said, and for once the word tasted like something I could set down without it rolling away. "Let me rephrase to help you. You don't know what you sold." He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried a sneer that didn't quite fit his face. "Enlighten us," he stated. "Not here," I replied. "And not like this." I lifted my eyes to Mom. "Make tea, please." She moved automatically, grateful for instruction, clinking cups with hands that betrayed her. The kettle began its thin song. I took the seat at the end of the table, not my childhood spot, not his, but a new one, where I could see all three of them and the papers and the blank wall where their certainty used to hang. I let the steam collect between us. I let the silence grow just tall enough to cast shade. Then I smiled again, the same quiet, clean thing. "You should have asked me about the name on the deed," I said. "Or at least the name behind it." I didn't make them wait long. I reached into my tote, the same faded canvas bag I take to the farmer's market, and slid a green binder onto the table. The metal corners caught the kitchen light. Helen had labeled the spine in her tidy blue cursive, Ross Family Coastal Trust. Dad glanced at it with a bored sort of contempt, the look he reserves for anything that might complicate his script. Mom's hands went still over the plastic grapes. "This house isn't titled the way you think," I said. "It hasn't been for years." Dad tried to chuckle. "Megan, a trust is a tax play. Don't embarrass yourself." I opened the tab marked trust terms, ran my finger down a page, and turned the binder so it faced them. Helen's initials, HJR, nested next to mine where she'd set this up with me the year I bought the cottage. I read, steady and slow, the way she taught me to read recipes aloud. Section 9. Forfeiture and Anti-Appropriation. Any beneficiary, family member, or individual acting in concert with them who contests, encumbers, transfers, or attempts to transfer any trust property without the written consent of the acting trustee shall be deemed to have predeceased the settlor as to all trust interests and distributions. Mom blinked. "Deemed to have what?" "Legally dead to the trust," I said. "No distributions. No shares. Nothing." Daniel scoffed. "You're bluffing." I tapped the margin where Helen had pressed her ring hard enough to emboss the paper. Below the clause, her note in pencil, "If anyone tries to take what's yours, they take it from everyone, starting with themselves." "This is why she insisted the cottage sit inside the trust," I said. "So it couldn't be helped out from under me when I wasn't looking." Dad reached for the binder. I kept my hand on it until he looked at me, then let the weight fall into his grip. He skimmed, jaw tightening. I could almost hear the gears. Attempts to transfer, acting in concert. The words did not care how calm his voice was, or how many times he'd said he knew best. "It's nonsense," he murmured, "but not to me, more like to the other part of himself." "Maybe, but it's recorded," I said. "Filed. Funded. Helen and I met with the bank's trust officer together. We did this properly." I let that fact take its seat between us. Then I reached into the tote again and set my phone on the table, face up. The screen lit to a grid of small thumbnails, living room, kitchen, hallway, porch, each stamped with dates and times. Still frames of my own life from angles no one in this kitchen knew existed. "Do you remember," I asked lightly, "when there were break-ins on Coastal Drive last year? You told me to be careful." I listened. I installed security. Dad's eyes snapped from the binder to the phone. Mom lifted her hand halfway, as if she might push the air away, then let it fall. "Yeah, I never announced it," I went on. "People behave better when they think no one's watching. Cameras in common spaces only legal, mine, backed up off-site." I tapped one panel. The kitchen grew into motion, my mother at my table, pen in hand, the realtor's folder open, a notary seal glinting under the chandelier. The video had that soft fisheye curve that makes the edges feel farther away. But the center was painfully sharp. I hit play. The room filled with "Our House, My House" played back to us. Mom wrote my name. "The tail on the G too neat, the R too smooth." She turned the page and signed again. The notary nodded, stamp coming down with a hollow thunk I felt in my teeth. "That's not my signature," I said quietly. "I make a notch on the R in Ross." "You forgot it. You also signed in black." "I only sign deeds in blue." I zoomed. "Here." Daniel's mouth opened, closed. "Everyone uses black." "Not me," I said. I swiped to another clip, Dad standing with the realtor in my living room, hands on hips. He pointed at the east window. The realtor laughed politely, scribbling notes. Daniel breezed in with 2 coffees, set them on my table without coasters, and did a 360 for the best angle. "Sunlit coastal gem," he said on the audio, and my stomach turned. I let the clips do the talking, the lockbox appearing on my doorknob, Dad telling the title office on speaker that the seller is in London, but authorized me, the courier handing a stack of papers across my porch. I scrubbed forward to the moment the notary looked up and asked, "Megan is unavailable to appear," and Dad answered before Mom could inhale, "She's traveling, but she gave me authority." The notary's stamp fell again. The camera's time code ticked in the corner, indifferent and truthful. "Where did you?" Mom started and stopped. "In the smoke detector," I said. kitchen, and the thermostat frame in the hall. Totally boring, but totally reliable. Everything uploads to a cloud account with a passcode only I know. When the realtor put my living room on her website, I archived that too. Metadata's a generous friend. Daniel tried to sneer. Creepy. Yes, but it's my house, I said. I also documented the emails you intercepted. I opened a folder of screenshots. The title office's message to an almost right address, the bounce, Mom's reply from her own email asking them to resend to this one, the clean copy of the wiring instructions. And the calls I missed, voicemails deleted from my phone, but not from my carrier. Dad had gone quiet. The binder lay open, the forfeiture clause spread in front of him like a line he hadn't noticed until his foot was already over it. You built this case, he said finally, a statement more than a question. I paused, then set a thinner packet beside the binder, a letter on the bank's letterhead, Helen's signature clipped and sure. Appointment of co-trustee, successor provision, no contest. I slid it toward Mom, who looked at the first line like it might bite. I'm the acting trustee now, I said. Helen made sure. Acting trustee means I get to enforce the terms. Mom's eyes moved from the paper to me and back. But we didn't mean. You meant to sell something that wasn't yours to sell, I said, keeping my voice even. You meant to take advantage of me being far away. You meant to move money before I could blink. The law doesn't grade intent on a curve. I tapped the clause again, gentle as a reminder. And here's the part you didn't know because you never asked. This trust has teeth. If a family member attempts to appropriate trust property, they forfeit their interest in the trust. All of it. There isn't a small print mercy clause. Daniel swallowed. Interest in the what, he said, as if the word itself tasted unfamiliar. As in, the legal structure that actually owns the cottage. You didn't sell my house. You tried to sell the trust's house. Which is worse. I said. Silence settled over the kitchen, new and heavy. The clock over the stove ticked with exaggerated patience. In the hallway, the thermostat's tiny green light glowed, loyal and unblinking. I flicked to one last clip. The angle was wide living room again, golden late light. Dad corralled the realtor near the sliding door. We'll handle everything, he said on the recording, the confidence of a man who has never had to ask permission to be right. Megan's too emotional about the place. This is better for the family. The word family hit the table like a dropped fork. I locked my phone and looked up. So, I'm emotional? I asked, and I'm prepared. Both can be true. Dad clenched his jaw. What do you want? He asked finally, but I could hear the real question underneath. What can you do? I didn't answer him yet. Answers live in the future, and tonight was about facts. I stacked the binder, the appointment letter, the evidence packet into a neat column that made sense to me. Then I pulled one more page from the back, a certified copy of the trust's notice of restrictions on transfer, the one Helen made me mail to myself and keep sealed until I needed it. I cracked the flap and showed the postmark date from years ago, then let them read the first line. Helen's voice carried through legalese. Any attempted transfer without the acting trustee's signed consent shall be voidable and shall trigger the forfeiture provision as to the attempting party. Mom's face crumpled in one tiny corner, an expression I had seen exactly twice in my life. Daniel stared at a spot on the table as if willing a door to open there. Grandma loved you, I said to Mom, softer than I felt. She also expected you to love me enough not to steal from me. I slid the stack back into my tote, not to hide it, but because the point had been made. The kettle clicked off behind her shoulder. And no one moved to pour. I set those cameras up to keep the home safe, I said. I didn't think I'd need them to keep me safe from the people who taught me to lock my doors. I let the kettle's thin whistle fade before I spoke again. Then, I slid a fresh tab forward, Schedule A, Trust Assets, and turned it so they could read the lines. You thought the trust was just the cottage? I asked. It isn't. Dad's eyes tracked the page despite himself. Mom leaned closer. Item 1, I read, Coastal Drive Cottage, held, maintained, and occupied at trustee's discretion. I lifted my finger and moved to the next entry. Item 2, Maple Street, Grandma's second house. The brown shingle one near the marsh with the blueberry bushes out back. You called it a drafty old box, Dad. She called it room for whoever needed it. She put that in the trust after Grandpa's stroke and never took it out. Their faces didn't change yet, not enough to clock, but I saw the memory land holidays spent there when the power went out in town, summer mornings picking berries with purple fingers. Item 3, I went on, tapping the line, savings and cash equivalents tied to this trust, specifically the high-yield account at Seacoast Credit Union. That balance has grown slower than you'd think and faster than you'd hope. Interest does what it does. Mom blinked. A second house, she said faintly, like the words had to cross a bridge to reach her. And cash. Not cash under a mattress, I said. A legitimate account. Documented and reported. Helen wasn't hiding treasure. She was preserving choices. For the family in time. Daniel tried to recover the swagger that usually saved him. Okay, so there's more in there. Then we're still fine. We didn't touch those. He cut himself off, but the sentence was already finished in the air. We only sold your house. I breathed in slowly, bracing. This was the twist they hadn't imagined, the part Helen had built with that cold, steady love of hers. You were each scheduled to receive your shares, I said, in 3 years. Dad's head snapped up. What shares you mean? I slid another document forward, distribution schedule. She set a date. Not when someone asks nicely, not whenever people behave. 3 years from the day we funded the trust. She told me to say nothing about it, to let time do its work. In 3 years, you were supposed to receive distributions from the liquid account. Maple Street would have been offered for family use with a plan to maintain it from the trust's income. That was her design. Silence rolled through the room, not the stiff kind from before, but something hollower. I couldn't watch Mom do the math out loud. 3 years, she repeated slowly. So Daniel would have received a share, I said. Yes, all of you would have. Daniel let out a small, disbelieving laugh. You're kidding. We were going to. I mean, how much? It doesn't matter now, I said, and the words were heavy enough that even he felt them land. Dad found his voice first, low and edged. Explain us. The forfeiture clause, I replied, steady. It doesn't care which asset you tried to take. It cares that you tried. It applies to the entire trust. You attempted to transfer trust property without the acting trustee's written consent. You acted in concert. And once it triggers, your interest, as beneficiaries, is deemed to have predeceased Helen. As in no shares. No distributions. Not in 3 years. And not ever. Mom's hand covered her mouth. For a second I thought she might argue intent again, might try to pour forgiveness over the paperwork like cleaner over a stain. But her eyes had found Helen's initials next to the clause. She knew whose voice this really was. Daniel shook his head, as if the world might reassemble. That's not fair, he said, the old plea breaking through. How's that possible? We're family. And Helen wrote this for family, I said. For the versions of us who might forget what that word means when money's in the room. Dad reached for the binder with a suddenness that startled even him. He turned pages too fast, stopped, turned back, found the section again like he needed to make sure the words hadn't rearranged themselves to spare him. I could see the calendar squares flipping behind his eyes, the plan he would have made if he'd known, the speeches about prudence, the lists he would have written to spend money before it arrived. He swallowed hard. You know, courts hate forfeitures. He tried once more, weaker now. They hate messy ones, I replied. This one is clean. Funded, witnessed, and tied to behavior, not personalities. Helen did this with counsel. She didn't make a trap, Dad. She built a boundary. And you walked through it. The clock ticked on the stove. Outside, a car passed and the headlight slid across the kitchen wall, briefly painting us all in white before disappearing. I didn't tell you because I promised her I wouldn't, I continued. She said time would tell us who we were. She was right. 3 years was supposed to give everyone room to grow up and settle down, to prove we could handle gifts without swallowing each other whole. Daniel stared at the table. Maple Street, he said, almost to himself. I was going to ask if I could use it a few weekends this fall. Tyler said the marsh is good for he stopped. Not that it matters. I thought of how many Sundays we'd eaten pie there when the heat made the city unbearable. She meant for those walls to catch us, not cage us. My throat burned. Mom finally looked up at me, eyes red but clear. She would have given us everything, she whispered. And we took first, I interrupted gently. She wrote a clause for that. Dad sat back, a man who had outsmarted everyone but his own mother-in-law. He pressed his lips thin and set his palms flat on the table as if bracing against a wave. So what happens now? He asked. The edge was gone. He sounded tired. Not contrite but diminished. Now, I asked. Now I send notice as trustee that a violation occurred and that the forfeiture is invoked. The distributions scheduled for 3 years out are cancelled as to you. The assets remain in the trust for their original purposes. I didn't add the rest because it wasn't part of this point in the story. The filing, the formalities, the next steps. No one spoke for a long time. I closed the binder and slid it back into my tote. The zipper's small sound felt like the end of something and the beginning of something else. I stood, the chair legs whispering against the floor. Grandma trusted us, I repeated. She trusted me to keep us honest. I wish I hadn't needed to. The machinery of consequences started slowly, like a reluctant engine, and then all at once. My attorney filed to void the transfer under the trust, and the county recorder flagged the deed. Within a week, the title company called the buyers, and I called them too. We sat in a conference room that smelled like dry coffee and carpet cleaner while their agent folded and unfolded a brochure. I told them I was sorry for what my family had done. They were kind in that stunned way people are when their plans dissolve in fluorescent light. The paperwork churned for 3 more weeks, and then the sale was officially declared invalid. Their bank wires came back, every dollar. They returned the keys they weren't supposed to have. He pressed the metal into my palm and said, "You didn't make this mess." I nodded anyway. The criminal part arrived like a gray morning, not dramatic, but impossible to ignore. The district attorney returned charges I had hoped we wouldn't need, uttering a forged instrument, filing false documents, attempted real estate fraud. The words looked too big next to my parents' names, too legal next to the faces that taught me not to lie. Their lawyer worked a deal, guilty pleas, no jail time if they complied. Suspended sentences. Probation. Fines. Restitution. Community service. The judge was measured, his voice steady as rain. Good people sometimes do greedy things, he said, eyes on my father. In the weeks after, envelopes arrived with state seals and due dates that didn't care about pride. The order spelled it out: pay the buyer's incidental costs, reimburse the title company and the notary, cover court fines, make the trust whole for legal fees. Probation for all 3, 2 years for my father, 18 months for my mother, a year for Daniel. Community service hours that made their calendars look like punishment had finally learned to tell time. They were forbidden from serving as fiduciaries or holding someone else's power of attorney. Their money didn't stretch far enough. It turned out that overestimating themselves had become a lifestyle. So the sign went up in their yard, the same white post-it arm my father had bragged about avoiding when the market dipped years ago. For sale. Price reduced. I drove by once and saw Mom wiping down the front door with a cleaner while 2 women from the neighborhood pretended not to stare from the sidewalk. Inside, family pictures disappeared from walls. A fake throw folded just so at the end of the couch. The open house was crowded and empty all at once. People came to see the spectacle more than the kitchen. In a town our size, reputation sticks like salt on skin. The cashier at Marino's stopped making small talk with my mother. Her book club paused indefinitely. My father resigned from the Rotary before anyone could ask him to. Online, the neighborhood forum did what neighborhood forums do: moralize, misremember, dig up old grudges, claim closeness with strangers. I always knew Daniel was trouble, one woman wrote, who had once begged him to DJ her son's graduation. They sold for less than they wanted. The spreadsheets finally had to add correctly. The equity went out in checks addressed to the state of Washington and to strangers in blazers who lined up restitution like beads on a string. When the moving truck came, I brought boxes. Not because I had to, but because the story had too much taking already. We worked in clipped sentences. Mom wrapped her teacups in newspaper that turned her fingertips gray. The house echoed. And humor didn't live there anymore. Daniel handed me a framed photo of the three of us at the county fair when we were small. You can see the cotton candy on his chin, my hair in a crooked ponytail, Mom's sunglasses reflecting a blue sky. He didn't meet my eyes. "Do you want this?" he asked, and his voice carried that old, thin thread of kindness he gets when he's very tired. I took it and wrapped it carefully and didn't say anything, because anything would have been too much. Probation has a way of making grown people more predictable than school bells. They reported to officers in a beige building near the courthouse, learned the language of check-ins and compliance, collected signatures that replaced grace. On Saturdays, my father picked up trash along the highway in a reflective vest that didn't match the man in his old golf shirts. He told himself it was community service, and it was, but it was also a portrait of how small a person can look next to the mess he made. My mother sorted donations at the shelter thrift store, smoothing skirts and pairing shoes and trying to be useful without being asked too many questions. A woman came in who used to sit next to her at choir. They nodded like strangers. Daniel's probation required employment. His resume had more opinions than experience. The only place that said yes quickly was the car wash off Route 12, the one with the plastic shark on the roof and a sign that always seems to be blowing in the wrong direction. He started on the vacuums, then learned the conveyor, then graduated to the hand dry at the end where your wrists ache and the tips are inconsistent. He wore a blue shirt with Dan printed over the pocket, because whoever ordered it thought shortening him might make him easier to keep. His hands chapped. He stopped wearing the watch he'd bragged about buying in Bali because the strap smelled like soap. He took the bus and started bringing his lunch in a paper bag, 2 sandwiches and an apple, because the vending machine ate bills it didn't like. The first time I drove through on a Tuesday, I didn't mean to. I had a meeting on the other side of town and forgot to get gas, and the Shoreline station shares a driveway with that place. I stayed in the car, watched the rainbow foam sluice down, and waited for the familiar sound of the dryers. When the belt carried me forward, Daniel stepped to my window with a stack of towels and looked everywhere but my face. Water beaded on the glass like arguments ready to slide away at the first bump. He wiped carefully. His shirt stuck to his back. For a second, he seemed 12 again, concentrating too hard on a task that should have been simple. He didn't wave, because we both knew what the moment meant. He had to scan my QR code to release the gate at the end. The laser blinked. The bar went up. I drove out into a blue day that didn't feel like victory. When the state mailed me confirmation that restitution had been made in full, the letter was clinical and polite. It didn't bless anything. It said the buyers had their money back, that fees were paid, that accounts were corrected. It was as close as bureaucracy gets to mercy, a receipt with the math made honest. My parents moved into a rental across town, one of those identical beige units with numbers instead of names. No porch to stage, just a stoop. On Sundays, I see them leave at 9:30 for church and return at 11:10 with bulletins folded in half and faces unfolded as much as they can manage. I won't pretend there isn't a chill in the places where family used to feel like a sweater. People cross streets slower when my father's car stops at the intersection. My mother waves too much. A barber I've known since 2nd grade told me he hopes we all find our footing. I told him me too. I took back my keys with hands that didn't shake. The first day I re-entered the cottage, I opened every window so the ocean could walk through the rooms and carry out whatever was left of the chaos. Dust sheets came off like winter coats. The floor creaked a familiar greeting. I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, pressed my palm to the frame the way Helen used to, and said out loud, "We're home." Rebuilding was daily. I made lists on index cards and taped them to the fridge, tile, trim, gutters, paint. I chose a soft white for the walls and sea glass green for the shutters, the color of the shallow water where the shorebirds step. The roofers patched what a storm had started, and I relayed 2 kitchen tiles that had been set slightly crooked by my own impatient hands years ago. I sanded the porch rail until it felt like the back of a well-loved spoon, then sealed it with the smell of cedar that clung to my hair for days. At night, I fell asleep with sore arms and a mind that, for once, didn't circle the same bruise. Neighbors I barely knew before stopped by with small offerings. Marisol from 2 doors down brought a casserole and gossip in equal measure. Ed, who fixes boats for a living, tightened my gate latch with a wink and refused money. The couple who almost bought the house mailed a plant with a note that said, "May this always be your view." I planted roses along the step and ran my fingers through it every morning, a reminder that something can be both hardy and fragrant, both practical and beautiful. I hung Helen's mixing bowls on hooks by the stove so they would catch the afternoon light. In the hallway, I framed the faded Polaroid of us standing on Maple Street's porch with blueberry stains on our hands. I left one shelf blank in the living room on purpose, a space for what I didn't know yet. The idea for the foundation arrived quietly, over tea on the back steps, the sea breathing in and out. The girls I saw clustered at the bus stop near the shelter came to mind, backpacks too light, eyes too old. I knew what a roof could do for a person. Grandma had always said love without structure turns into a wish. So I named it the Helen Ross Foundation, registered the paperwork, and sat with a patient clerk who helped me file for nonprofit status. I opened a separate bank account and put in the first deposit with money I'd saved for a vacation I no longer wanted. I asked Sarah, a social worker from the shelter, to join the board, along with my attorney and Mrs. Chin, my high school English teacher who somehow still knew every kid by name. We met around my kitchen table with a pot of chili and a Google Doc, arguing kindly about whether bus passes or bedding should be priority one. We decided both. Our first program paid for 3 motel nights for girls in emergency transition and matched them with a case manager within 24 hours. Then came the Saturday pantry, soap and period products go fast, a tutoring hour run by retired teachers, and a small scholarship fund named after the year Helen taught herself to type. Donations trickled in. A dentist offered cleanings, a hairstylist offered appointments for interviews, a coffee shop put a jar by the register with our flyer taped to it. I made receipts, wrote thank you notes with real ink, and cried in the pantry when Kayla passed her GD. I met Evan on a Wednesday I was supposed to be buying screws. He was at the hardware store counter asking too many good questions about sandpaper, the kind person who reads the label twice and buys the tool once. He volunteered with the writing club at the shelter and offered to drive donated books to our storage unit if my car was full. It was, always. The second time we met, he showed up with drop cloths and an old boombox. We painted trim and listened to public radio until the sun slid off the edge of the day. When I climbed down the ladder, he held it steady without commentary. That was the first time I noticed how my shoulders relaxed when he was near. We didn't begin with declarations. We began with lists and grocery runs and the quiet bravery of showing up. He learned my coffee order and how to fold the foundation's brochures on the dotted line without leaving a ridge. I learned he had a scar from a childhood skateboard incident and a laugh that waited for you to finish your sentence. One night, after a fundraiser where the mic kept squealing and I spilled hummus on my dress, he put my coat over my shoulders and said, "You're doing something good, Megan." It wasn't a grand speech, but it was enough. The circle around me widened, but it also clarified. People who had always really seen me stepped closer. Ed fixed the foundation van's tail light for free and taught me how to replace fuses. Marisol organized a bake sale and somehow turned it into a block party. The girls started calling the pantry Helen's Cupboard, and the name stuck. We painted it on a sign together in crooked letters and hung it over the door. At home, the rooms learned my new rhythms. Mornings were for coffee on the steps and emails to donors. Afternoons were for site visits and looking at rental agreements with a highlighter. Evenings were for soup simmering while I reconciled spreadsheets, and then for walking the beach with Evan, our feet matching the tide's slow beat. He kissed me for the first time near the driftwood log that looks like a whale. It felt like coming back from a long trip and finding the lights warm in the window. On the first anniversary of getting my keys back, I invited the board and a handful of volunteers to the porch. We strung cafe lights across the eaves and passed around paper plates stacked with potluck food that tasted like neighborhoods. Someone brought a guitar, someone else a cake with "For Lovely Helen" piped in shaky icing. Late that night, after the last folding chair clicked shut, I walked through each room, touching walls the way a person blesses a child's forehead. The house had held. The life inside it had too. I don't pretend everything is easy now. People bring their pain to the door and sometimes it spills onto your shoes. But I know how to mop. I know who to call. I know how to ask for help without apologizing for needing it. I stood once more on the porch of my ocean house, looking at the waves breaking against the shore. It had been months since the chaos, the betrayal, the endless court hearings. My house was mine again, not just legally, but spiritually. Every nail, every wooden plank, and even flower in the garden was a reminder that I had survived what should have broken me. The family that once mocked me, stole from me, and treated me as invisible had destroyed themselves with greed. And I built something greater out of their wreckage. Now I finally understand. Family matters, but only when respect and love walk beside it. Without respect, family becomes dependence. Without love, it becomes a prison. True family lifts you up. False family drags you down. Have you ever been betrayed by those closest to you? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Your support may give courage to someone else who's afraid to defend their own dignity. Because sometimes, one story is enough to remind us that we are stronger than those who try to silence us.